Now that you've reached the third video in the series, then you have already accomplished so much. You've researched your topic and gathered strong evidence, used that evidence to write your claim, used that claim to organize your thoughts and your evidence around that, and you've now crafted an argument piece around your claim. So you might be thinking, okay, so what's next? And to introduce today's topic of counterclaims, then I'm going to pose a scenario that's probably familiar to most people. Now, when I teach students about argument writing, then I often want to separate that out from arguments, the common use of the term when we argue or we fight verbally with someone in a way that can be kind of vicious, honestly. That's what we think of as an argument a lot of times. Argument writing is actually the opposite. It's very reasoned, it's very measured, it always relies on evidence. But in this case, I'm going to use the more familiar definition of an argument to kind of show why we use counterclaims and introduce into what a counterclaim is. So most of us have been in a situation with someone that's close to us, maybe a parent or a sibling or even a good friend, where that person gets mad at us for something that we did, fairly or not, and in the ensuing argument, they then proceed to point out all of the things that are wrong with us as an individual or what we did that they took offense to. And I want you to think about what goes through your head when you're having an argument with a person like that. A lot of times, what will be going through your head is you are arguing back with them, even if it's not somebody, if it's someone like a parent or a teacher where maybe you don't feel like you can actually argue back. Still in your head, you're probably arguing against everything that they're saying. Everything they're saying, you're following up, mentally at least, with a yes, but. In some cases, you may be saying this out loud. So you may be countering everything that they say, at least mentally, because you understand that they are providing a very unbalanced picture of what just happened. And so in your mind, you are providing evidence for the other side to show the other side of the story. And that's essentially what a counterclaim is. A counterclaim is acknowledging the existence of arguments or claims for the other side and making sure that your reader, who's probably mentally, if they disagree with your claim, is going through the same process that you just went through in that hypothetical argument with someone close to you where they're pointing out all of your flaws. Your reader is also going to be arguing with you in their mind as they read. They're going to be trying to shoot down your evidence. They're going to be trying to punch holes in your claim by bringing up mentally, anyway, all of the different reasons why they think that you're wrong. So counterclaims help you to answer those mental arguments in your reader's head and ultimately allow you to show why your claim is the strongest possible claim on a topic. So just to review, I am answering the question in my argument piece, should advertising be allowed in schools? And so I have now looked at two sources, an article from the LA Times and an article from ABC News, and I gathered all of my evidence together and I formed a claim, seeing that I had more evidence against advertising in schools. I formed this claim that I talked about in my last video. Public schools should not allow ads on their campuses because ads teach unhealthy habits to kids and lead schools to depend on corporate funding. Now, some of you have probably right away noticed that one of the big arguments for the other side, which is that a lot of these schools that are allowing ads aren't doing it because, they want to, hire massage services for their students or, get luxury meals of caviar and sushi every day for lunch. They're not getting luxury services for their kids through these ads. They're buying very basic needs. So if you're on the other side from me, you might be arguing with me this whole time that, hey, schools don't really get too much of a choice. So I'm going to head off that argument in my work today. So a counterclaim should do a few things. So first of all, as I said, you're providing a claim from the other side. And you're always choosing a strong claim for this. And you need to acknowledge at least one counterclaim in your writing. You can always do more than one. If there are lots of claims from other sides, then you might choose more than one. But the key here is that you are choosing a strong claim. You don't want to pick something that's silly or weak from the other side because it doesn't strengthen your argument. A good counterclaim always strengthens your argument. And so that's why you want to have a strong claim from the other side, because if you can argue against that, then you can really argue against anything. So in a counterclaim, you're presenting a claim from the other side. That's the first part, but you're not merely mentioning that there are other perspectives. You are then following it up by explaining why your claim is still the stronger and better claim. So again, by acknowledging your counterclaims, you are actually strengthening your own claim and your own argument. This should look familiar from a prior video. This was how I organized my note cards that I had of evidence that I had collected from the LA Times and from ABC News. The different colors match with the different sources. And at the time, I looked at this section here, and I noticed that I had lots of evidence against ads in schools. And that's why I ended up writing the claim that I did, because I had the stronger evidence there. But today we're going to look at the evidence that I rejected at the time, and we're going to think about which of these pieces of evidence is the strongest, which one I need to address in my counterclaim, and we're going to write a counterclaim, not only presenting that counterclaim, but then explaining why my claim is the stronger claim. So both of these could be potentially good counterclaims, but really, kind of as I alluded to before, the second one, that schools sell ads because of budget cuts. They need the money for supplies and programs. You know, this is not like schools are selling ads so that they can send their kids, you know, on a trip to all expenses paid trip to Europe. You know, as awesome as that would be, you know, that's not what they're doing this for. They're buying very basic supplies in some cases, or they're using it for salaries of teachers so that they can keep art programs or music programs going. So that is a really strong counterclaim. It's hard to argue against that. It's hard to argue that what option do schools have, right? Their budgets have been cut, so they've really been driven to do this. That's what the other side would say. So before I show you how I'm going to address that counterclaim, let's think a little bit about where your counterclaim is going to go in your argument piece. So today I'm going to talk about how to locate a counterclaim within an argument paragraph. If you're writing an essay, in my next video, I'm going to talk about organizational strategies for argument essays. However, really the thinking is the same. You're just dealing with it at a larger level. A lot of times a counterclaim in an argument essay is going to take more than a sentence or two. You might even spend an entire paragraph on a counterclaim. In an argument paragraph, of course, it's much shorter than that. But in both cases, the same basic ideas hold true. But definitely watch for that next video if you're working on an essay. So first of all, in an argument paragraph, your counterclaim can go anywhere between your topic and concluding sentences. So you want to have that initial sentence or few to introduce your topic, and you want to have that final sentence or few to summarize and explain the importance of your topic. But anywhere in there you can locate your counterclaim or counterclaims. Now, some things to think about. You want to think about what we call the primacy and the recency effects. Now, if you watched my video on concluding paragraphs, on just general essay writing, then you would know the recency effect is something that our brains do that help us to remember the most recent information that we've heard. So for example, if I were to read off a string of 20 numbers and then ask you how many of those numbers you remembered, chances are you'd probably remember the ones that came towards the end of the list. So this is something that psychologists have observed of how human memory works. And what it means is that you want to locate your strongest information that you definitely want your reader to remember close to the end. Now, the primacy effect is the opposite of that. It's the tendency to remember next best the things that we hear first. So again, if I were to read off, say, a list of names, like I were to say there's going to be 20 kids in your class this year, and here are all 20 of their names, and I were to read their names down the list, you probably remember the last ones that I read. That's the recency effect. You might remember 3 or 4 of those names. But you probably also remember the kids that came near the front of the list. So you might remember the first 1 or 2 names that I read. So after the recency effect, your brain next remembers the things that it hears first. So what that means is you always want to put your strongest evidence close to the end or at the beginning of your writing, because your reader will remember it better there. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about your counterclaim. If you really feel it strengthens your argument, it can go at the beginning or the end. If it's something where you feel like there's a strong case to be made in the counterclaim, then that might be something you want to bury in the middle, where your reader's not going to remember it as well. And finally, your counterclaim, you really just need to think about where it best fits with your evidence. So your evidence should lead, in most cases, naturally into your counterclaim or your counterclaim comes out of some of your evidence. So you just have to think about where the evidence suggests that counterclaim would fit. So let me show you what I mean by that. So here's the argument paragraph that I wrote last time. So here's the argument paragraph that I wrote last time, and I'll read through it again to remind you guys of what I wrote. So it says, public schools should not allow ads on their campuses because ads teach unhealthy habits to kids and lead schools to depend on corporate funding. According to education professor Alex Molnar for ABC News, kids are already extra vulnerable to the messages in ads because they don't fully understand them. I'd say it's evil, says Molnar. You have sophisticated psychological techniques and tons of money devoted to manipulating 6, 7, and 8-year-olds to do things which aren't necessarily healthful to them. In an example of ads teaching unhealthy habits, the LA Times gives an example of a healthy school lunch menu decorated with ads for M&Ms. Ads can also lead to an unhealthy dependence of schools on corporate funding. The LA Times wonders what will happen if ad revenue dries up. Where will schools get their money from? Furthermore, they suggest that schools desperate for cash might be pushed to allow ads that aren't appropriate for schools, like ads for R-rated movies or junk food. In these situations, the need to please advertisers becomes more important than the needs of the students public schools serve. In conclusion, the physical health of students and financial health of schools should compel students, parents, teachers, and administrators to speak out against ads in their schools. So now as I read that and thinking that the counterclaim I'm going to address talks about the need of schools to raise money, think about what section that would best belong in. Is it at the beginning where I talk about how kids are especially vulnerable to ads and how ads can teach unhealthy habits? Or is it at the end in the second half of my paragraph where I talk about some of the concerns around schools becoming financially dependent on advertisers? Does it fit better with the healthy eating side, or does it fit better with the financial dependence side? Since I'm also talking about money, it would fit better in the second side. So let's take a look at the sentence where I see a really good opportunity to lead into a counterclaim. So when I say the LA Times wonders what will happen if ad revenue dries up, that seems to me like that would be a really good point to start talking about why schools are using ads in the first place, and to maybe address some of the concerns around that. So if I'm going to do that, then one thing that I need to do is I need to use a transition word to signal to my reader that I'm about to switch over to talking about a counterclaim. Otherwise, if I just plop that in there, my reader won't understand how those two ideas are connected. So if you're in my class, then you are super familiar because these are hanging on my wall, as well as a handout that you would have in your humanities resource binder with these transition word graphics. So here I'm showing a set of graphics for the concession transition words. And if you are not in my class and you're watching this video for your own edification and you would like a copy of this, I will link to it below the video in the description of the video. So concession transition words are used to introduce a counterclaim or show the other side. So I'm going to choose one of these words here that's going to signal to my reader that I'm about to talk about the counterclaim. So in this case, I'm choosing doubtlessly as my word. And always with transition words, it's important to understand that they are not all created equal. So you need to make sure that your transition word makes sense for the sentence and section that you're writing. So don't just pick one at random, but really think about which one fits best with the sentence that you're writing. So here's what I came up with. Doubtlessly, Schools are acting because of financial uncertainty in the first place, because budget cuts mean they often cannot afford supplies and programs. The LA Times wonders what will happen if ad revenue dries up. Okay, so I have that nice transition word, and I introduce my counterclaim, that's that first sentence there, where I'm saying, look, schools are acting out of a sense of need here. But you might have noticed that the second sentence now sounds kind of rough. That's because I actually now need a second transition word. So I've used a concession transition word to signal to my reader that I'm about to talk about a counterclaim. Now I need a contrast transition word to show that I'm switching back to talking about the opposite side, which is my own claim. So here we have our contrast transition words, again from that same resource down below if you want to look at it. And these are going to signal to my reader that I'm switching back to my own claim. So in this case, I'm going to choose what I call the little black dress of contrast words, however. However is a really kind of all-purpose word to use when you're doing this. You present your counterclaim. You say, hey, the other side is saying this. However, and then you explain why your argument is the strongest. So let's take a look at how I did that. Doubtlessly, schools are acting because of financial uncertainty in the first place, because budget cuts mean they often cannot afford supplies and programs. However, the LA Times wonders what will happen if ad revenue dries up. Where will schools get their money from? Could welcoming ads push schools into more dire financial straits? So if you remember back to the two parts of a counterclaim, you're not only introducing the other side, but then you're explaining why your side is the stronger. It's really hard for me to argue against the need of schools for money. Teacher salaries have to be paid, supplies cost money, buildings cost money to keep open. So the fact that school budgets are being cut, it's no easy solution to that. So what I've chosen to do in my counterclaim section is not only to bring that up, but then to say, I understand that this could be the case. And I'm not wishing this problem away, but if we come to depend on advertisers, we could end up worse off than we already are. And if you continue reading my paragraph, you'll see that the ending part of my paragraph where I talk about, for example, how advertisers could get schools so dependent on that money that they're able to convince them to allow ads for things that are not school appropriate or healthy for students, then I really address there the possibility that, opening up schools to ads as a way to get money can actually end up harming the very kids that you are trying to help by doing so. So I think I've done a pretty decent job in this case of not just introducing my counterclaim, but also explaining why, even though that is the reality of situations for schools, they really do need to dig a little bit deeper to find other options, because coming to rely on ads could actually end up being a very unwise decision for their students. Okay, so we have today talked about counterclaims, so now you should feel much better prepared to cut off those mental arguments from your readers' heads and answer all of the concerns that they might have about your claim by taking a strong counterclaim, taking the strongest argument that you can imagine them thinking as they are reading your argument, and explaining why your claim is still the stronger and better claim. So good luck with your writing, and happy writing.